Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Nonprofit HR's webinar on how you can audit your HR function for talent sustainability. My name is Alicia Shoshinsky. I'm the co-leader of Nonprofit HR's Knowledge Practice, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. We have a lot of great content to cover, so let's get started. But first, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, I want to note that there's no dial-in for today's session. The webinar is being streamed through your computer. But for the best audio quality, make sure your computer speakers are turned on and your volume is up so that you can hear the presenters. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so we recommend that you log off your VPN. If your slides are behind, you can push F5 on your keyboard and that will refresh the page. Webinars are also bandwidth intensive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help conserve your bandwidth. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see multiple application widgets which you may use. All of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to maximize your screen space. The green widget that has a document-looking thing on it contains resources such as the slides from today's session, links to a white paper, and other helpful resources. You can also expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the box in the upper right-hand corner. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the purple Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. And we will try to answer those at different moments during the session. If you'd like to contact Nonprofit HR for more information, you can click on the blue widget that has an envelope on it, and it will send an email to us to be addressed following the presentation. We will also try to answer questions during the webcast, but if we can't, we will follow up via email. You can also find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget, which is a yellow box with a question mark in it, and that is at the bottom of your screen. And we will email a copy of today's slides to you, plus the other resources that are attached following the webinar. We'll do that tomorrow along with your HRCI and SHRM activity recertification credits. And at the end of the session, a feedback survey will pop up. We certainly appreciate you providing your thoughts on today's session and letting us know about any other topics you'd like to hear about in the future. You can also see the survey in the second little widget that it looks like a clipboard at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so today's webinar is sponsored by Cornerstone, so I'd like to turn this over to Rachel Rutherford, who can share information and to introduce our speaker. So Rachel?
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. As Alicia mentioned, my name is Rachel Rutherford, Marketing Strategist for Cornerstone On Demand. Cornerstone is pioneering solutions to help nonprofit organizations realize the potential of the modern workforce. As a global leader in cloud-based learning and human capital management software, Cornerstone is designed to enable a lifetime of learning and development that is fundamental to the growth of your nonprofit and its employees, volunteers, and members. The company's solutions are used by more than 3,350 clients worldwide, spanning 37 million users across 192 countries and in 43 languages. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Today you'll hear from Sidney Abrams, Managing Director and Head of the Consulting Practice at Nonprofit HR. Sid leads Nonprofit HR's consulting practice with more than 20 years of human resources leadership experience. As Managing Director, Sid oversees client engagements for HR projects and on-site outsourcing. He has successfully led many complex engagements, including multi-state compliance audits, HRIS implementations, and functional assessments. Sid is highly versed in human resource strategy and implementation with recognized expertise in the areas of audit compliance, analysis and improvement, and HRIS HR technology. His undergraduate degree from the University of Maryland is in human resource management, and he has earned professional certifications from HRCI, SHRM, and HCI. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sid.
Rachel, thank you very much. And Alicia, thank you for the housekeeping and welcome. Thanks, everybody. I'm looking forward to sharing with you today information that I've gleaned over the years in terms of how to audit your HR function for long-term talent sustainability. Just to remind everybody, as Alicia said, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A widget, and we will make sure we answer them as we go, rather than saving all the questions for the end. So with that, let's dive in and talk about what is it that we hope to learn this afternoon. The learning's objectives, as we put them together, would be firstly helping to define talent sustainability. So what does that mean for your organization? How does talent sustainability and organizational sustainability intersect? Secondly, how talent sustainability can improve your organization and how and where you can invest to ensure that your talent helps to make your missions move forward. Finally, and this will be the meat of the presentation, is why and how you audit your HR function for talent sustainability. So before we talk about the auditing, let's go through a little bit of information about talent sustainability. We'll define it, what it is, and help you to think about why it's important for your organization. So there's two definitions we actually will go through on this slide. The first is the first half, which is what is nonprofit sustainability. And the quote is, nonprofit sustainability occurs when a nonprofit attracts and effectively uses enough and the right kind of money. And what we like to say is that when you talk about your nonprofit talent sustainability, is that you add to that sentence by not only attracting and effectively using enough and the right kinds of money, but also people necessary to lead and achieve their long-term outcome goals. So it's the intersection of nonprofit and talent sustainability. And as you can see here, there's four main pillars of nonprofit sustainability: having a clear mission, having a long-term focus on what your organization is, who is your mission, and where are you trying to serve. Thirdly is having a model that's financially viable. And fourthly, making sure that you're setting yourselves up to have an exceptional impact. And what we like to ensure is that you then layer talent on top of all of that to ensure that your nonprofit is not only sustainable, but sustainable from a talent perspective. And if you look here on this slide, you'll see that the most impactful and sustainable nonprofit organizations are really those that understand that organizational sustainability and talent sustainability are not either or propositions, but rather they're interdependent, right? If you invest resources one, that the other one can benefit from. So it's not one or the other, but it's really a matter of both. And if you think about the kind of organizations that you have, there really are three different phases of this nonprofit talent sustainability. And we'll just mention them very briefly. First is you have what's called the talent oblivious organization. And what defines a talent oblivious organization? Well, this is an organization that has little to no resources allocated for talent acquisition, talent development, or employee retention. These are organizations whose hiring and whose retention practices are often ineffective. They're very last minute and are not well thought out. They are absent of any planning. And finally, these are organizations whose leadership really focus their time on programs, fundraising, and finance. And focusing on staff really is seen as incidental. It's often taken for granted. So that's the talent oblivious organization. The talent aware organization is one where leadership is aware of talent, but they're not taking intentional steps to move their talent forward, right? These are where organizations have made allocations of resources for talent acquisition, for staff development and retention. They are really seen as nice to haves, right, as opposed to really being essential for your organization's success. Activities around hiring, development, and retention may be inconsistent, and talent management planning does not happen. There are no ties to talent outcomes and goals as part of a strategic plan, and there's no integration of those. So that's the talent aware. And then finally, kind of the highest end of the food chain would be the talent-focused organization. And these are where organizations who intentionally allocate resources for recruiting talent, for developing and retaining talent. These are seen as essential to organization success, where organizations have effective processes in place and they're prioritized around hiring, development, and retaining talent, and where talent management is inclusive of and really a key part of and integrated with the strategic plan. So this is kind of the highest level of talent sustainability from an organization standpoint, and where we hope that organizations all move over time. Why is this important? I think is an important question to go through when you're thinking about kind of your specific nonprofit. Number one is, I think everybody realizes that in a nonprofit organizations, 9 times out of 10, salaries and benefits are your top costs, right? They're your highest, biggest expense item, and that is a resource. That is a expense that really has to be managed. It has to be nurtured. It has to be invested in. I think that organizations realize, and frankly, it's one of our firm's tagline, is that your mission will be as impactful as to the extent to which you prioritize your talent. Without good talent, it's impossible to meet your mission. These are organizations that shed the view that talent sustainability is nice to have. They move it to a must-have. And finally, they leverage their brand as an asset for attracting talents, and we'll talk about that. But at the end of the day, I think we all realize that world-class organizations are those that prioritize talent investments. Now, these investments don't have to break the bank. They can be inexpensive. In some of the cases, they can be free, and we'll talk about how do you make those right time investments and financial investments into your talent strategy and do that through an audit process. So you might ask yourself, how do you know if your organization is poised to achieve talent sustainability? And really, there are 3 things that you can look at. Number one, I think you have to be ready to audit to do an audit of the allocation of resources that you have allocated for talent acquisition, talent development, and talent retention. These are the tools that are essential to organization success, and we'll spend the majority of our time today talking about that audit process. You need to prioritize moving activities around hiring, development, and retaining staff to the front of your priority list. You have to make it critical to your success. These are all activities that are part and parcel to the talent management life cycle, which we'll talk about later. And then finally, talent management planning is integrated into the strategic plan. Now, it doesn't have to be a huge component. You can start small. Perhaps it's one goal within a 5 or 6 series of goals that the organization is outlining. It can be one bullet. It can simply be an acknowledgement of the importance of talent. And then if you think about how do you do it, there are a couple of different buckets that you can fall into around your talent sustainability. The first phase would be being intentional, right? Being intentional about creating that strategy. In this phase, you must understand that talent is an asset to be managed, nurtured, and invested in. You have to recognize that your mission will be as impactful as the extent to which you prioritize talent. That's the intentionality phase. The second phase is around talent strategy. And in this phase, it requires that your strategic plan has a talent management component, which we've talked about. Your organization really needs to allocate the appropriate resources needed to achieve your talent management plan objectives. They have to just go beyond the basics, right? This isn't just about compliance, payroll, benefits administration. It's really around your talent strategy. And finally, once you have that strategy in place, it's about integrating it into the overall focus of your organization. So in this phase, you'll integrate people management goals with your long-term organizational goals. You'll integrate talent and HR leadership with your senior management, and you'll integrate talent management with other measures of performance. So we're going to help you think through how do you move from one phase to the next through the audit process. So you might ask the question, why do you audit an HR function? And the definition of audit I've purposely left vague here, right? This could be a compliance audit. This could be an audit of your HR practices. This could be an audit of your HR technology. This could be an audit of the effectiveness or efficiency of your department. But if you think about audit from a very broad standpoint, why do you do that? Number one, and I think most importantly, it's to identify whether your department's specific practices and processes, technologies, people are adequate, compliant, and effective. That's at the core why it's important to audit. So the next piece you want to think about, once you've made the decision to audit, you want to ask the question, what do you audit? And for purposes of this presentation today, we're going to break the audit into 6 components: compliance, talent acquisition practices, right, how you bring people into your organization, HR systems and processes, the talent development and performance management area, compensation and benefits, we call total rewards, and finally, workplace culture and engagement. So these are the 6 major buckets, and now let's take a deeper dive into each of these areas. So starting with compliance, right, and you might ask yourself the question, well, why is compliance important to talent sustainability? And I think fundamentally, if you don't have an HR function that operates in accordance with federal, state, and local law, how are you setting your organization up for success, right? I think at the backbone, you know, rules and regulations and laws are set up to protect not only the organization, but also the employees. And you want to create an environment where you've got kind of fundamentally that baseline covered, and then, you know, moving forward, you can talk about how do you then move from compliance into best practices. So if we talk about a compliance audit at a very high level, really 3 main goals. Number one, you're going to assess all the functional areas of HR, from talent acquisition and recruitment all the way through exit management and separation, to identify any compliance gaps with federal and applicable state or local regulations, right? That's kind of the baseline, kind of the bottom of the pyramid. Secondly, what we like to do when we work with clients to audit their function is we review their policy manual to uncover any inaccuracies, misstatements, or policies that don't align with current requirements and or best practices. And then finally, we like to audit the employee files and payroll records to ensure accuracy, required checks and balances, and proper documentation. How do we do that audit? So when we work with clients, we really do the audit more of a ongoing interactive conversation, I call it. We sit down with the HR professionals or those who have responsibilities for each of those functional areas, and we literally will walk through an employee life cycle through a Q&A process and look at it with different lenses. So for example, if you're talking about talent acquisition, which we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes, during an audit, we will literally start from this phase of a position becomes vacant. What's the first thing that you do? Do you have a process for opening up a new position requisition? What's the requirement to update a job description or the compensation range before you post those positions? And we will literally walk through the entire process all the way up through making an offer and try to poke holes in that process through the different lenses, right? Whether it be through a compliance lens, whether it be through a effectiveness or an efficiency lens, a leveraging technology lens, whatever the lens may be, we will sit and we will work through that type of an iterative process through the entire course of the HR lifecycle. So that would be things like hiring, onboarding, benefits administration, policies and procedures, record keeping and government reporting, total rewards, comp and benefits, payroll and salary administration, performance management, talent management, learning and development, employee relations, all the way through separation as needed, and really paint a picture of what is going well from an HR standpoint, what is compliant, where are there red flags, and setting up a roadmap for how to address them. I think it's really important to have checklists so that you are consistent whenever you're auditing your HR function. Checklists ensure that you are being consistent with how you manage each of these individual functions. And one of the questions you should ask yourself is, do you audit your function using internal or external resources? And we'll talk about that question and that paradigm in just a couple of minutes. But when you're looking at the compliance audit, I think you want to look at a few things that determine kind of baseline compliance. These are the kind of the minimum requirements to have a compliant HR department. Number one would be your mandatory regulatory postings. These are the kind of the all-in-one postings that you must post in a conspicuous area within your workforce. You want to look at the policies in your handbook, right? How often is your handbook updated? How is the handbook communicated to employees? Do they have a chance to sign off on these handbooks? So there have to be just a minimum number of policies that are included in your handbook, and these are mandated by the different regulatory bodies. But more importantly, we like to look at a handbook and see, is it written in a way that's reflective of the culture of your organization, right? So for example, if you have a very informal environment, you wouldn't want to have a handbook that is written solely by a lawyer in very kind of strict legalese, right? Or conversely, if you have a very formal environment, you may not want to have an informal handbook that doesn't, that leaves a lot of interpretation or a lot of opportunities for employees to interpret what a policy may be. So you want to make sure that the handbook is written in a way that's reflective of your organizational culture. We also like to address position descriptions, and this is a document that I would argue is probably the most foundational document for an HR department, right, or for an employee. When you think about position descriptions, where do they impact? Well, they certainly impact talent acquisition, right, and creating the job, and what is the job description, what are the requirements, what are the duties of the person. It has an impact on compensation, right, because when you're benchmarking compensation for a position, you're basing it on the position description. It impacts performance management and goals, and how do you hold an employee accountable for achieving the outcomes that they're required to. So all these things are kind of packed into what I call the most foundational document of a position description. You want to make sure that you are paying attention to and auditing your record keeping and document retention requirements. There are no fewer than 7 federal laws that actually stipulate different retention requirements for different documents within an HR environment. Government reporting, that's everything from your 5500s to your EEO1s to all of the other various reporting and requirements of the government that you have to submit on behalf of your organization. Making sure that your organization has a effective performance management cycle and a process, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And then finally, making sure that your employer has a qualified employment counsel. Do you have counsel internally? Do you leverage an external paid attorney? Do you have somebody on your board who provides pro bono guidance and support? It doesn't really matter how, but it is important that you do have a legal counsel to provide input and information to important employment decisions. What are some of the pitfalls that we see when we work with employers on auditing their HR function? Number one is position classification, right? Exempt, non-exempt. Is an employee or is a person an employee or a contractor? Do you have paid and unpaid interns? And we'll talk about those in a little bit. Manager training, right? Many organizations have very strong individual contributors that they promote to a manager or a supervisor in order to retain that employee. Well, just because you're a strong individual contributor doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a strong manager. So what training are you providing for either new managers or existing managers who may not be effective at what they're doing? Communications and social media. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about a few years ago when the NLRB put together requirements about concerted activities and what activities were protected when employees are posting about social media. So it's really important to understand what employees can and cannot do, and more specifically, what employers can and cannot prohibit employees from doing. looking at all of the requirements around benefits and the Affordable Care Act and ERISA and all the different requirements for reporting and employee communications and fiduciary responsibilities that come along with your benefits practices. Obviously, your employment practices and how are you treating an employee, what are the policies and processes that you have in place to protect them. Decentralization we also see as risky business. When you have certain functions of HR that are passed down to managers, for example, hiring, right? How are you maintaining quality control? How are you ensuring that managers are not asking questions that are illegal to ask? So I'm not suggesting that you don't decentralize HR functions, but if you do, you have to keep a close, quality control on what your managers are doing or are not doing to ensure there are no compliance vulnerabilities. So that's risky business. So, those are all the things that you want to look at when you're talking about a compliance audit for an organization. Believe me, there are many, many resources out there that will offer to, provide you a kind of a step-by-step checklist, and many of them are effective, but I think taking a wholesale, external, unbiased look at your HR practices and ensuring baseline compliance is the first step of ensuring talent sustainability. So let's move on and talk about talent acquisition, right? So how do you bring in people to your organization in a way that is long-term sustainable? So what we like to do is we work with clients to review their talent acquisition processes and practices. And what we start by doing is looking at your sources for recruitment and where you're finding people. Where are you sourcing talent? How are you ensuring that your candidate pools are diverse enough, right? Do you have diversity goals, or do you have an affirmative action plan that you have to make sure you are recruiting in a specific candidate catchment area or a pool? Are you posting a position description, word for word, or are you crafting a compelling ad? So how are you putting yourself out there as a public face for the first time a candidate will see your organization? In terms of the interview process, who is involved? Is HR driving that process? Are hiring managers driving that process? Are there phone interviews? Do you leverage video technology? Are you requiring everybody to come in person multiple times? You want to think about it from the candidate standpoint, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes as you set up the structure for your interviews. With pre-employment testing, there obviously are a number of legalities that you have to ensure compliance with and ensure, most importantly, that what you're testing is relevant for the position that's being hired for. Same thing with background and reference check processes. There are a number of requirements from a compliance standpoint with the Fair Credit Reporting Act that you have to be mindful of, and a lot of those functions can be outsourced as a way to save time and mitigate any exposure or liability. And then finally, looking at your offers of employment. You might think, well, that's a pretty simple thing. Well, in fact, there are a number of pitfalls that you should watch out for. Number one, ask yourself, who is authorized to make an offer? Does that verbal offer come from HR? Does it come from the hiring manager? What about the written offer? If a hiring manager is making an offer to a candidate, and if the candidate tries to negotiate and push back, is that manager given the autonomy to negotiate? How does that one manager negotiate differently than a different hiring manager? So there's a number of complexities to think about. One of the things we love doing when we work with clients is once somebody has joined the organization, is to have them receive a call from the CEO. How special would a new employee feel if before they started they got an email or a phone call from the CEO or a senior leader welcoming them into that organization? One of the resources I understand that we've uploaded into the resources widget, I think that's what it's called, is a white paper we recently put together on the 10 best practices and 10 pitfalls with the talent acquisition process. So feel free to download that. I want to talk for a few minutes about the candidate experience. The candidate experience is certainly something that we've all heard about more recently, and I think data points to it, right? How does a candidate, from the first time they see your ad all the way to the time they start as a new hire, see your organization? How are they treated? What is their experience? And if you look at this stat here, 82% of candidates with a great experience say that they're extremely likely to refer their friends and colleagues, right? So what a great way to keep up that talent pipeline. So a few things to think about. So number one, awareness and attraction. Like we said earlier, where are you posting your positions? How are you leveraging social media? Where are your candidates? If they are on Twitter, why aren't you advertising on Twitter? If they're on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and other platforms, that's where you should be trying to market your opportunities. How do you leverage employee referrals? Do you have a formal employee referral program that rewards employees who are referring candidates that they think would be a good fit? Secondly, making sure that your career page on your website is robust, making sure it's telling a story about what it's like to work for your organization. Make it salesy. Include quotes from current employees. Include pictures or videos if you have. Testimonials. List out how great it is and what the wonderful benefits are for working in your organization. This is your chance to kind of put your best foot forward. Number three, making sure that your recruiting process is easy, that candidates don't have to, come back in and reformat their already existing resumes to fit within your applicant tracking system, just making sure that the process is easy for them. Number four, your time to hire. Be expedient. Obviously, if you take too long with your recruiting processes, you're going to lose candidates. How do you leverage technology for online scheduling? Finding a really robust applicant tracking system that doesn't have to be even very expensive can make that process a lot easier. And then finally, in terms of candidate disposition, once you've decided that you're not going to hire a candidate, release them as soon as they're disqualified. There's nothing worse from a candidate standpoint than waiting a week or two or three or four sometimes, not knowing where they stand with respect to a position when they've already been disqualified from consideration, 1, 2, or 3 weeks ago. And then finally, by having a good, strong candidate experience, what you're able to do is you're able to turn candidates, even those that you don't hire, into brand ambassadors, which is going to only further your opportunity to bring in great talent into your organization. So moving on, we're going to talk about HR systems and processes. So this is where kind of the nuts and bolts of your HR. What are the processes that you have in place for ensuring that you are providing the kind of services that your employees are looking for? So we'll talk about employee onboarding in just a couple of minutes, but moving on to HR technology, right? What are the things what's the technology or the HR information system, HR management system, HCMS, whatever you want to call it? What system do you have in place that enables your employees and HR to be more efficient in what they do, right? Is your technology mobile friendly? How are you creating opportunities for employees to request time off from their phone or their iPad, or to change their direct deposit or their beneficiaries, or to change their address? Whatever the situation is, you want to make sure you're leveraging technology appropriately to make things easy for your employees. There was a point where many years ago, technology vendors were trying to cobble together multiple different platforms into one kind of one-stop shop technology solution. And then there was a move, after that, then you came kind of back to decentralization, and you would kind of bring in multiple best-of-breed types of providers. And now, again, we're seeing a shift to these, original technology systems or providers really beefing up their systems and their technology to have a seamless one-stop shop where it manages everything from applicant tracking through COBRA administration and everything in between. So this is really important from an efficiency standpoint, for the HR people, right? How are you managing timesheets, time off requests, employee change requests, benefits administration? All these things can leverage technology to make life easier for you too. From a time and attendance standpoint, we have, some clients we work with still have paper timesheets for, workforces of 300 people. Well, why, right? they just do things because they've always done it. So we like to have you question and just make sure that you're doing things because there's still value add in doing it, as opposed to we've always done it that way. And from a termination standpoint, again, just making sure that you're creating a system that allows employees to seamlessly exit the organization as easily as they came into the organization. What are your processes around somebody who may be involuntarily terminated, and how are you enabling them to do so in a way that is preserving of their dignity, that gives them the ability to do so with their head held high on their way out. Again, this is an opportunity for you to create a really large cadre of alumni, folks who have left your organization. Leaving on a positive note will only help you as you build your brand of alumni that are out there. We have some organizations that we work with who realize that their entire life cycle is only about 1 to 3 years for all of their positions, and they're okay with that, but their strategy was specifically to provide an amazing world-class experience for those couple of years for those employees, and then to turn them into kind of forward-paying brand ambassadors going forward. So that's a very creative way to kind of address what otherwise could be seen as a turnover and attrition problem. So let's talk for a few minutes about the employee onboarding, right? And as you know, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And, what first impression do you want to make to new hires is something you need to think about. What is it that they are experiencing from the time that they come into your door? I think to the extent you can, you should leverage technology to make that process seamless, although I would not advocate using technology exclusively. There really has to be a human interaction and a piece of onboarding as well. And I would also advise that you don't rush, right? Focus on your long-term onboarding strategy, right? It's not unusual or uncommon to have a 60 to 90-day plan. And you slow walk that orientation to really enable that employee to embed themselves within the organization. In terms of stories, I think it's important that when you bring employees that you recognize who they are as people and how do they engage and fit into the culture of your organization. How do they relate to your values? So I think leveraging stories and interpersonal opportunities are a great way to do that. In terms of career development, I think it's really important to show new employees, particularly millennials who are come in, that there is a path forward for career development, that they can build a career in your organization while immediately making contributions to the work that they do. And then standardizing the processes. You can see from the stat at the bottom, organizations that have a standard onboarding process experience 50% greater new hire productivity. It gets them up to speed faster. And this is a great opportunity from an onboarding standpoint to really be creative, right? How do you get those new people coming in the door who are super eager, super excited to come in, integrated with your workforce? I've seen clients who have created like passport opportunities or using gamification, using creative bios and staff meeting presentations to indoctrinate employees into the culture of their organizations, and those have all seemed to work very, very well. So this is a great chance to kind of put your best foot forward and be creative. And finally, soliciting feedback. Have specific checkpoints with new employees at the 30-day, 60-day, 180-day mark to really understand how are they working their way into the organization. Are they finding that they are effectively kind of moving into their roles? Is there anything that, looking back, they would have liked to have had in an onboarding experience that they didn't, that will enable you to kind of adjust your processes going forward? So always soliciting that feedback. The next area is talent and performance management. And what we like to see is working with the clients who are very intentional about creating a kind of talent management life cycle. This is a perpetual cycle that is always kind of evolving and is not linear. So many organizations have a linear process, but we like to see where they are cyclical like this. Different things you should be looking at when you're auditing, right? What are the specific opportunities that you're making available to your employees to develop themselves? Do you link learning and development with your annual goal setting process, with your regular check-in and feedback opportunities between employees and supervisors, and with your performance management system or performance management process? How are you leveraging technology? There are amazing learning management systems out there that provide employees and managers kind of these customized career paths to give them both the soft and hard skills necessary to move into new positions. And as you know, there is no shortage of very inexpensive or free content out there that you can be having your employees take advantage of. The bottom line is it has to be intentional. You have to make sure that it's ingrained in the work that your employees are doing every single day. Shifting to compensation and benefits, again, it can be, in one sense, a very kind of tactical, nuts and bolts type of activity, but there's also strategy behind your total rewards, right? So if you think about the nuts and bolts of compensation, what are the most important pieces? First, we recommend doing a job description audit or a position description audit. We talked about the importance of that document earlier. We always recommend that clients have their employees update their job descriptions annually in accordance with the performance management cycle. You're already kind of thinking about the year that passed and then the year ahead. Why not use that opportunity to dust off your job descriptions? Other things from a compliance standpoint to think about, as we talked about earlier, position classification, W-2 versus 1099, unpaid interns. How are you creatively leveraging all that talent? To what extent is your organization leveraging the gig economy and kind of these WeWork or Upwork type of opportunities to leverage very inexpensive and very talented people to offset what you have for your internal talent? But probably most importantly on here is what I would talk about is your compensation strategy and philosophy, right? What is your philosophy or strategy organization? Do you pay below market? Do you want to pay at the median? Do you want to pay above market? This should be said at the senior staff level and communicated to your employees. And then are you looking at the external market every 3 to 5 years to make sure that your compensation levels have kept up with the market? Right? This is a great opportunity to leverage external resources to support that effort, people who are experts in comp and live and breathe and sleep this every day. We like to see when you're, like leveraging people who can use multiple sources of information, right? Getting a single source of information may be relevant, but it's not necessarily valid. And then so leveraging external kind of survey sources for that is always a best practice. And not only when you're looking at your external compensation, but you also want to make sure you're looking at your internal equity as well to make sure that you're paying employees equitably, both kind of by role, and then you're looking at your gender equity, you're looking at your racial equity, and all the other types of ways of looking at comp to make sure that you are being aligned with the strategy that you've put forward. So there's a lot there on the compensation slide, but I'd say the two most important things would be setting your strategy and setting your philosophy, and then doing the homework to get external and internal data to make sure that you are paying consistent with what that strategy is. Tied to compensation, of course, is benefits, right? That's the other piece of that total rewards picture. And one of the most important things we do when we like to work with clients is we ask them, how do you know that your employees value your benefits? Well, we offer a great benefits package. Well, have you asked employees that? You may think you offer benefits that they value, but in reality, they might not find those same benefits of the same value as others that may be better to offer at the same price. So surveying your employees every 2 to 3 years to make sure that you are offering a benefits package consistent with what it is that they value, that they're looking for. As your workforce changes over time, the benefits that they're looking for might also change. So how do you design a benefits package that is reflective of your philosophy and the workforce? So again, every 2 to 3 years, we like to suggest that you look at that. Additionally, if you think about your leave programs, right, many employers offer traditional sick and vacation and holiday and personal time, but other employers are offering PTO, where it's aggregated in one type of bucket, and employees can take time off without question whenever they want. So there are pros and cons to having different types of leave plans that you should be asking yourself what is most appropriate and what's most applicable for your organization. One of the other things that's very important also that we can't emphasize enough is that there's a communications opportunity here, right? And these are what we call total compensation statements. Many of you may know what they are, but might not utilize them as a really effective communications vehicle. And what a total comp statement is, for those who don't know, is, most employees feel that their pay is whatever they take home every other Friday or twice a month, once a month. But in reality, that's only a fraction of their total compensation. Their total compensation is made up of their cash compensation, plus all of the taxes that not only the employees pay, but the employers pay, their benefits. And think about it, most of you, if you have a, 15, 20, 25% fringe rate, there's 15, 20, 25% that, employees are getting that they might not necessarily realize. So communicating the total cost of somebody's, or the total value of somebody's compensation package can be an incredibly effective way to communicate how you are investing in your employees. And then finally, what I mentioned, FMLA Compliance Plus. By that, what I mean is that there are many organizations that might not be required by law to offer FMLA because of their size or where they're located, but these organizations are still choosing to offer either paid or unpaid leave to employees for dealing with those types of scenarios that are protected under the FMLA. So those would be things, for example, like the birth or adoption or fostering of a child, for a serious health condition for them or one of their dependents, so on and so forth. They're offering these very generous leave programs, even though they're not required to be offering the FMLA. One of the things we caution employers to, however, is if you offer a quote, quote, FMLA program, then either you're not offering it or you're all the way. There's no half offering it. So if you're going to offer FMLA, you need to operate by the letter of the law, which, as you know, is not always so easy. There's a lot of complexity around that. So just thinking about your benefits. And then the final area, the area that I would actually argue is probably the most critical when you're assessing your talent sustainability, is around workplace culture. And the things you want to ask are, does your workplace culture and environment promote and encourage employee engagement and retention? And the first thing I'll point to and talk about is exit interviews and stay interviews. And if you don't know what a stay interview is, it is, so many employers will ask employees on the way out, right, what they liked about their employment, what they didn't like, what they would change, so on and so forth. But many employers don't ask those questions about current employees. So what gets an employee up every day and coming to work? Why do employees stay year after year? So shifting the model to not only asking those employees those questions on their way out, but while they're actively employed by your organization is a very effective way to understand what is working and what is not. Most importantly, when you ever are doing a survey of your employees, whether it be through a stay or exit interview or an engagement survey or a culture audit, whatever you're doing, is to do something with the results. There's no bigger kind of pitfall in doing employee surveys than having somebody take a survey and never hearing what happened with it. So you got to be really careful to make sure you're sharing results with those with whom you took the survey. Workplace communications are really important in trying to understand the degree to which your employer is effective at communicating with employees. How do you do it? Do you do it through all staff meetings? Do you do it through newsletters? Do you leverage Slack or some other kind of online collaboration tool to make sure people are getting the information they need when they need it? So making sure you do have effective communication strategies. And in terms of employee engagement, one of the things that is most successful for employers is engaging employees in that process. So whether you have a social committee or a culture committee or an engagement committee, bringing employees together where you can to be part of the solution will always be more effective than having that be a top-down approach. And in terms of the culture audit, right, when I talk about their leaders, talk to people managers, talk to individual contributors, it's very important that you get a really diverse set of perspectives around what people perceive to be the culture. Don't simply ask that question around the senior management team table, because what they perceive as the culture might be very different than rank and file employees. So have HR drive that process proactively. It can be informal. It can be through just kind of day-to-day conversations. It can be through a more formal survey. But no matter what, HR needs to keep its nose to the ground and be listening and understanding what's going on within the workforce. So as we're kind of rounding third base here, we're talking about how do we tie this all together. I wanted to focus the last couple of minutes on kind of what does the audit process look like and what's a kind of steps you should take to audit your HR function. So the first step, and this is probably the most important, is securing buy-in from your leadership before you begin. They must be willing to invest in the audit process. They must be willing to also invest and do something with what they find. We talked about that just a few minutes ago. So securing the leadership buy-in up front. Use metrics. There are metrics out there that will tell you, where your organization is benchmarked against its peers. And we'll talk about benchmarking in just a second, but leverage that data to make the case. Secondly is deciding on if you want to leverage internal or external resources to audit your HR function. There are obviously a lot of pros and cons to each method for doing so, but things you want to think about include what is the capacity of your HR team to audit their own function? What is that team's credibility within the organization? If the HR team is not held in high regard by employees in leadership, well, you may not want to have HR do that audit. What is the level of talent? Do you have a deep enough bench of senior people who could impartially lead that audit process? And what are the current state of affairs within that organization? What's going on kind of tangential and external to HR that might impact your decision on whether or not to use the internal or external resources? So once you've made that decision, then you want to take the deep dive. It's time to move into that audit process. My experience is if you use an external resource, you're probably talking about a 2 to 3 day on-site process that follows some due diligence and some discovery, spending time with HR contributors, senior management members, doing focus groups with employees and people managers. If you're going to do this internally, you really need to make time to prioritize this process. If it's always like, I'll get it done after I do everything else that needs to get done, it's never going to happen. So as part of that, once you kind of get all the data input, then you want to benchmark your findings against best practices, right? So leveraging data that's available from, web-based resources around turnover, time to hire metrics, HR ratios, all those kind of data analytics that will help you to benchmark and understand where you are with respect to your HR function and how it's operating from a compliance and an effectiveness perspective. We talked about reporting out your findings. Again, it's really important to share information, and it can be redacted, and you can be, not necessarily the full report, but you can certainly share information back with employees around what are we going to do now? What are the things we're going to be doing in the next 30, 60, 90, 180, 2 years down the line to move our organization from where it is now to where we want it to go. And finally, once you've implemented all of the things that you found per your audit, it's time to measure progress. How are you doing? How are you checking back in quarterly, annually? What are the goals and metrics that you've established that you're going to hold yourself accountable for achieving, and how are you doing on that journey? And then where you find that you're missing the mark, how do you readjust to shift your plan back? So that's kind of the process that we go through when we look at an audit. And just to kind of wrap it back to the sustainability, why does all this matter? Why does talent matter? Because as Monisha Kapila, who's the founder and president of ProInspire, says so eloquently, an investment in talent is an investment in your organization's ability to achieve its mission and meet the increasing societal needs for which you operate in the first place. So I hope I've been able to provide a good amount of information to you today around auditing the process of your HR, why it's important, how to do so, and the process that you take. Alicia?
Great. Thanks, Sid, for all the great information you shared. And again, thank you to Cornerstone for sponsoring this session. We do have a couple of questions. I'm going to go ahead and ask those. And in the meantime, if anybody has any other questions, please use the Q&A widget on your screen, and we'll try to answer any questions in the time that is remaining. But if there are outstanding questions, we can email responses after that. So, Sid, the first question was, do you recommend any resources for training up or supporting a new crop of managers?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think the answer to that is probably not so simple. So I think it's really going to be a combination of things that really depend on where your managers are. So if it's a first-time manager, I mean, there's everything from the very simple 5-Minute Manager book, right, that you can read. It's a very quick read, but that provides kind of really just rudimentary, very basic tools on how to become a manager. There are no shortage of management blogs that are out there that you can subscribe to that don't cost anything. There are countless. I mean, listen, if you just go out and Google or you do an internet search for manager training decks or PowerPoints, you're going to come up with a dozen or more like training materials that are already out there that you can leverage for your staff. Many times there are SHRM courses and resources in the local community. There are there are a gajillion independent consultants who do that, either as a group training or as a one-on-one coaching or training opportunity. And certainly there are always consulting firms who offer that, again, on a one-on-one or a group basis.
Okay, thank you, Sid. The next question was, what advice do you have to make the business case to your executive leadership to conduct an audit?
Oh, another great question. So I think you can point to a number of things when you want to make that case. Number one, I think you can point to the exposure and the kind of risk your organization faces by not assessing your function, right? If you're thinking more specifically from a compliance audit, there are very specific penalties and fines and things that are very bad for your organization should you be found to be out of compliance. From an effectiveness standpoint, I think it really points to kind of how are you leveraging the talent. What are the do you have from a metric standpoint, for example, 5 people in HR for a 100-person organization. If you do, chances are you could be overstaffed. And how are you? Why are your processes perhaps so inefficient and perhaps ineffective? So pulling from metrics and data that is readily available online also can help you to make that business case. And just simply, linking the performance of your HR function to your talent, right? If you are, for example, an organization that has a high degree of turnover, let's say more than your industry or more than your segment, why? Is there anything going on culturally that might be able to answer that, right? So thinking about what are the kind of challenges your organization is facing from a talent standpoint and linking that to being able to address those through the audit process, I think would be very effective.
Okay. I think that's all the time we have today for Q&A, but I do want to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. We hope you found it to be valuable. And if you'd like more information about available services or support from Nonprofit HR, please email info@nonprofithr or visit us on the web at www.nonprofithr.com. We want to once again thank Cornerstone for their sponsorship of today's webinar. And I also want to make sure that you complete the feedback survey that will pop up once the webcast has ended. So if you stay on the line, that should come up shortly. So we certainly appreciate your participation today. Thank you so much and have a good day.